Hi, Brian. We're live.
Hi, Michael.
How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. I'm very excited about what we're going to be talking about.
Wonderful. Me too. Thank you for joining us today. Let's see. Do we have anyone in the chat yet? As you do come into the room here, why don't you guys jump in the chat and let us know where you're coming from, and we'll wait just a little bit to make sure everyone's joined us, and then we'll get started. But as we've got people coming in, I see some people coming to the chat now. We'll get going, and I'll introduce myself. My name is Mike Weber. I'm the community and event manager at Pixelz, and I'm excited to have this conversation with Brian Gavin today from Globaledit. We're going to be talking about shot to ready, problem-solving creative content workflows. And Brian, as a way of getting started, can you give us a little intro about yourself in Globaledit?
Yes, absolutely. Hi to everyone who's joining us today. Thank you so much for the next 45 minutes of your time. Really excited to dive into what it means to go from shot to ready. I'm Brian Gavin. I'm the president of Globaledit. We are the leading creative workflow management solution for digital content, and have been very much enjoying our time getting to know the Pixelz team as we've been building our partnership and creating solutions that go deep into the post-production workflows at the major brands around the world. So thank you, Michael, for hosting today, and very excited to dive in what it means to go from shot to ready.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, me too. And if you're new with us here and not sure what Pixelz is, we handle post-production and retouching for large brands, large retailers. And what makes us a little different from the other retouchers out there is that our use of AI and hyperscalable workflows enables us to take retouching to the next level and achieve extremely fast turnarounds and low or a high acceptance rate of approval first time around. So this is a wonderful exploration of, Brian, I think, the ecosystem that our two companies come together and help enable. And let's talk a little bit about what this is doing for our customers, and specifically how we interact with our customers with a kind of a flow framework or mindset. Let's talk a little bit about what that means in regards to sharing assets from shot to ready.
Absolutely. So every brand, knowingly or unknowingly, or any content creator, I would say, goes through flow in some way, shape, or form. And flow, specifically in the realm of moving through your post-production process, means that your content can move harmoniously through the post-production processes while the ancillary team members around you have the ability to carry on their workflow and their responsibilities. What's so great is that we at Globaledit and alongside yourselves at Pixelz share in this similar vision of what it means to go through flow. And specifically, it means that we're creating efficiencies on the core workflow tasks at hand, but the ancillary team members around are able to benefit as a result of that.
Yeah, we in working with Globaledit, it's a matter of kind of plugging and playing and just getting our technology quickly into the hands of the people who need it. Flow for Pixelz is a kind of a concept of continuous operation. And this is a similar approach that Globaledit takes, as I understand. We're receiving content from our customers. It's going right through to production, and without stopping, without batching, without pausing, it goes right back into the whole ecosystem again, and everything is running smoothly.
Absolutely. And while there are specific, very important components that go into the retouching process, let's think about for a minute the team members that are around that retouching process. You have your design and marketing teams who are awaiting the right version to start layout and product preparation for selling new assets on your website. There are designers and creatives that need to take those assets and work on them after they've gone through initial rounds of retouching. And ultimately, what we're very focused about is that each workflow track within the organization is a component of flow. And you want those aspects that happen around the retouching process to be able to start when retouching starts, but also stay in sync with where those assets are based on the particular components of retouching that are happening.
And you're kind of talking about all the way down at the other side of the workflow, whereas Pixelz is way at the beginning, but Globaledit is the conduit and connects the rest of the team together with that studio output.
Yeah, this is a really critical issue that we see happen in a lot of organizations where post-production and the rest of the creative and marketing processes, they're disconnected or they're reliant upon one another versus happening in one flow ultimately together. And in some of the very specific use cases that we've delved into with Pixelz, this opportunity where retouching can happen side by side with design and layout, with marketing collaboration, with those folks on the creative and post-production teams that need access to these assets while they're being edited and they're being manipulated. It allows folks to, one, understand the content that is upstream from them, two, to gain access to work in progress versions of those assets, and three, as those work in progress assets are coming back from retouching, is stay in sync with the latest version. And so it's really just interjecting those latest rounds of retouching or those latest versions right into the particular workflow streams that your design team, your marketing team, your art direction team are all responsible for carrying on. Those responsibilities can happen in parallel versus separately and independently of one another.
Yeah, if that was the old way of doing things where no one has visibility on what their counterparts in e-com are doing, or their counterparts in studio, or again, all the way down at the other side of things in marketing. That's the old way. The new way is being completely in sync. And there's a multiplier effect of being in sync and being able to cut time, cut communication, and always have one central source of truth, right?
The one central source of truth is really one of the big things that I think we can talk about for a second, because with Globaledit and Pixelz being integrated, it starts to paint the picture of what we think about as an ecosystem of technology. In today's day and age, we expect all of our systems within our creative repertoire to be interconnected. And by doing so within the likes of Globaledit and Pixelz, it's created that one single source of truth that regardless of what team you're in, you're accessing the latest version of that asset for your particular discipline.
So there are so many people involved. There's so many versions of these assets. And we kind of have defined this, or we talk about this, Brian, you and I, as being a 360 approach to solving workflows, or building 360-degree workflows. And this is where the term shot to ready comes from. It's taking into consideration all of the different directions, the 360-degree directions that this flow of files and information is going through. Can we talk a little bit more about 360 and what it means to go from shot to ready?
Absolutely. Typically, when you're looking at how to create 360 workflows, it's because there is a problem within the organization of content accessibility. And so when we look at 360 workflows, it's a little bit about creating a diagram of all of the tools that make up your creative ecosystem. You have a project management system, you have studio production tools, you have your DAM, and you have other systems like your website, your CMS, and all of those systems ultimately make up what we refer to as your creative ecosystem. And each of those needs to be mutually aware about what's happening. That might be from a data perspective, ratings or statuses from your DAM being updated in your project management system, but that's also about the assets being in sync. And that's besides the data component, which helped Globaledit and Pixelz ultimately leverage some of the AI technology around sorting and assignment of the assets in post-production. It's really about the assets being in the right system at the right time. And for the folks that are benefiting off this in the post-production process and retouching, that means that downloading, uploading, the version management, all of that is being handled through the integration of two systems that, quite frankly, in today's day and age, should be talking to one another, and through the likes of the technology capabilities of Pixelz and Globaledit, was a low barrier entry to execute, because we saw this ripe opportunity where putting the assets in the right place to support the workflow streams made so much sense.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about the time savings with 360 workflows? And obviously we're condensing everything. We're stripping out the old complications of communications, like we've said. Can you talk about maybe an example of what that time saving looks like?
Yeah, so from across the clients that use Globaledit, we see about a third of the content that's uploaded into Globaledit makes its way into Flow, which means after you conduct selects or alts, your markups, the content that goes into your post-production streams, it's about a third of the content that gets originally uploaded. So we're continually focusing on how to reduce that kind of waste in content. But from there, within the last 30 days, we've seen about 10,000 new campaigns enter Globaledit, where clients are seeing about a 30 to 40% reduction in time savings because of how automation and interconnection of the ecosystem is able to benefit from one another.
Well, it makes sense, especially if you're 30% of your content's making it into the DAM, making it into the workflow, then you're saving 30 to 40% of your time by not having to repeat those processes at every step of the way. So the math works out. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see the benefits for each organization differ depending on where the key focuses are, right? If we can agree that there are 6 steps essentially to get from shot to ready, and I would say a lot of us probably are thinking, I don't have all 6 steps. I have a different component before intake, which is around ideation and discovery. It's about finding the efficiencies within each one of those steps that are limiting your brand to taking your content to the next level and to ultimately creating those efficiency gains that when you look at you take a step back and you look at what your creative ecosystem is all about, is what's handling intake, what's handling content discovery, what's handling implementation or production and the closeout of your content, and where are those natural barriers that when you take that step back and you look at what process is all about, it becomes pretty evident about where those time sucks are, and where some of the efficiency gains can be made.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those efficiency gains being made is, and where you find them, is it's going to change. It's going to be a completely custom discovery process for every client, for every brand, depending on their workflow. So that's kind of the beauty of Pixelz and Globaledit, is the API integration, where we can pick and choose those different areas that we can optimize for and solve just for that one area. And it's not a one size fits all type of, it doesn't have to be a one size fits all solution. If you're finding the right partners and you're solving for a very specific use case, you can have a very lean solution that solves only the problems you need and without the bloat of unnecessary tech.
Can I dive in for one quick second, Michael?
Yeah.
So specifically within the likes of how Globaledit and Pixelz are operating, one of the big challenges that we see is, one, how does retouching workload get assigned to in-house and partner resources for conducting retouching? 2, it was about the ability for the retouchers to have clear instructions on what needs to be retouched, what's ready to be retouched, and ultimately getting those assets into the system of choice that manages the retouching process. 3, the retouching component, particularly in editorial, which is so amazing that we're handling it through Pixelz. I know that's a major advancement that the platform's made, but also on the e-commerce side, which is bread and butter, is retouching really was the gateway to so many other teams awaiting content. It meant awaiting what even content was available, awaiting content that is so crucial to begin the design and the real creative conceptualization. And ultimately it meant awaiting the downstream distribution. So when we took a deep dive into the benefits that this specific component of the creative process has, which arguably is kind of touching concepting, implementation, and production. When we focused around down to really what the pain points are, it was around workflow delegation and ease of access that our retouching teams had in terms of getting content in and out of that source of truth, which ultimately was Globaledit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can be a big a pain point, finding files in a folder that have been finished and been delivered and not then passed on to the next person and the workflow. So as I understand, our partnership with Globaledit will push images right from our finished our flow production right into Globaledit, and without another button being pushed right to the desk of the person needing that asset, perhaps in marketing.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting when we started to unpack, and Michael, you and I have had quite a few conversations together. It's getting back to the crux of what flow really means. Flow, in the most basic concept, means that each of the creative team members who are involved in getting content shot in the studios, retouched, and out to the website, it means that they can stay within their particular discipline of responsibility, and that they have the opportunity to focus on what their greatest output is. So often are the creative team members bogged down with the responsibility of managing the process or managing where the assets are meant to be, when ultimately us as creatives or marketers within the organization, we're here to help bring the brand to life in the best way possible, to produce the most creative, inspiring content that reaches our audience. And when you're sucked out of that flow about thinking about what's best for your audience, about producing the best assets possible because you're managing the process or you're managing where the assets are meant to be, those are just the distractions and the barriers that
absolutely, yep.
They seem so obvious to all of us. And as I'm sitting here, I'm like, yeah, that's obvious. When I have to manage the process, I have to manage where the assets are, obviously. But I feel like for some of us, there's almost we're complacent in the fact that, well, we have to get through retouching, we have to get assets to our website. We already do this process today. So how much more can I possibly improve, or how much more flow could I possibly create?
Well, if you don't know that there are these areas for improvement, it's hard to, if you know, a studio manager has done their work and they have created the most efficient ecosystem that is possible, but these new technologies are now making even more infinitesimal adjustments and tweaks to our workflow and efficiencies even more possible. So,
and I'll say one thing is, the folks that are on this line that probably aren't coming from an IT team or with a technical background, is our job as creatives or marketers is to understand the ecosystem that our assets ultimately play within. But as a starting ground expectation, every system that touches your creative ecosystem should be connected. That's the way that modern day technology is built. That's my expectation of Globaledit, is we should be easily connected into any of the tools that make up the creative ecosystem, and vice versa. And so it really is about not the how, because that's our job at Pixelz or Globaledit to make those things happen, or and ultimately to find partners where that ease of integration is easy, not daunting and intimidating, and to help express all of the nuances of the workflow. When you can articulate the opportunity to build the automation and the integration efficiencies, it comes when you have really low barrier to entry from systems like Pixelz and Globaledit, that they're meant to talk to each other because of the framework of how our two systems are built, and ultimately the belief that, part of staying in flow means that the assets stay in flow, which is they're in the right system at the right time.
Well, and you would think it would be easy to make that happen, but I think we're at this influx of, ecom has been around for, a decade, longer than that, but this modern era of advanced retouching, advanced studio processes, we've been developing that over the last decade, but now we have this intersection of old studio processes and new technology, where I think a lot of people were looking for solutions that were all-encompassing, something that could come in and solve their capture and their workflow. But I think it's really important, and what we've done successfully at Pixelz is specialized, and what Globaledit has done successfully is specialized. And it's with the tech and the APIs that allow specialist companies like ours to work together seamlessly for our clients and have a perfectly integrated workflow that is also perfectly customized, and doesn't have to be this one size fits all solution that you can't fit a square peg in a round hole all the time. So we make that square peg fit.
Absolutely. It's part about from a specialization standpoint, it's about what matters most to your brand and what are the tools that support those creative phases as elegantly and efficiently as possible. I think if you hear any software vendor telling you that they solve everything from shot to ready all within one system, probably run. But finding those systems of specialization and having experts and champions within the organization that really own those disciplines, right? We're finding so much success between the partners that use Globaledit and Pixelz because there's a champion that owns and oversees the responsibilities that happen within Globaledit. There's a champion within the organization that ultimately oversees the specific retouching responsibilities that happen within Pixelz.
Yes, exactly. It's a workflow, an ecosystem of partnerships that work together. Let's talk about the tech readiness aspect of a company and what they need to do to make this happen and feasible.
Okay.
What's the first step? How do we get everyone on the same page?
It's one, awareness within the organization about, does everyone understand what the process is that takes our assets from shot to ready? It doesn't mean that everyone needs to be an expert in every single phase of the creative process, but there needs to be 360 awareness about what is the workflow that these assets ultimately go through, and that we understand who those stakeholders are at each part of the key creative phases.
Brian, let's go back. What's this slide that we have up here right now?
It's to ask the question and kind of look at what is the creative workflow in particular within Globaledit and Pixelz that makes the most sense. And this was a part about looking at, are we ready to talk about a technology integration that can solve the retouching bottlenecks that we see are so prevalent within an organization?
Brian, actually, we have one question here from the chat that is kind of relevant. We talk about saving time with Flow, and I want to jump over to this question now because we kind of haven't addressed what Flow does as far as time saving. A great example that we like to use at our conferences, at our Flow conferences, is a client that we onboarded to a Flow process, and we turned around their retouching from shot to their version of shot to ready, from a 30-day process to a 3-hour process. So this was just a matter of a high volume studio getting bogged down with lots of communication, lots of retouching requests, and not being able to get those assets out to delivery until dozens of meetings are happening and dozens of requests are happening. But now we've simplified this process. So literally like cutting 30 days off of our turnaround time. So to Yash B, that's kind of an idea of what Flow can do as far as time saving on retouching. Flow and Globaledit, Brian, can you quantify that? What a time savings might look like? I know it's a different type of thing to quantify because Globaledit is such like it's not a one size fits all. It's a very specialized tool for the different customers that are using it. So what's a good way that you think about time savings with Globaledit and Flow?
Yeah, so because the retouching process is so integral to the gates of the downstream team members. Like I mentioned, some of those key roles are really around design and marketing, focus on your e-commerce website. We're seeing huge reductions in time that those team members are waiting on content for them to begin their components of the job. So readying for site layout and how your product is going to be appearing on the website, readying campaign assets, those jobs that are so essential. And again, we want to allow those team members to have as much time to think creatively about what their output is those jobs to be done are starting right at the point in which the work in progress asset is headed into Pixelz. And we're seeing about a 40% decrease in time that it takes to turn around those assets. And so if you think about that in a matter of days, if your standard turnaround time is 7 days, you're seeing a 2 to 3 day reduction in time to getting those assets into the hands of partners who are ultimately waiting on the content that's locked up and retouching, if you will.
Got it. So the content readiness handoff is one of the big parts of speeding things up for you.
Yeah, there's 3 big components to content readiness. One is around having your brand, fit your standards. 2 is around usability. Usability in the context that content that's produced in a photo shoot or on location with a very specific use case in mind, for a particular editorial shoot, or even most commonly in the e-commerce production side can it be leveraged in an editorial capacity, is that this content has multiple disciplines of use potential, and thinking about how that content can be ready to be accessed by more and more team members. And in the third component, and this is for me so crucial, is that the distribution of this content is almost always on. We're always distributing the latest versions of these assets to the team members that need access to them.
A great comment from Janus from Pixelz. Actually, he's making a good comment that reducing work in progress is another gain from Flow. So there's just this big dead space of work that's not being touched, and we're getting rid of that with Flow as well. So thank you, Janus, for that good comment. So optimizing the usage and the extensibility and being able to come back to that content at a later point is another great way that we can think about content readiness. It's ready already.
Absolutely. We had in some of our initial conversations, we talked about the concept of the Christmas in July. So let's maybe, Michael, if you want to talk a minute about what that usability means there, we can kind of use that as a crux to talk about the technology component that is tied to the readiness as well.
Actually, I want to kick that back to you, the Christmas in July concept. Can you?
Yeah. So when your content lives in a central repository, and the day and age of a digital asset management system is nothing new, but the awareness that this content exists in the DAM, that it's searchable, and that it's being extended to all teams within the organization, it allows you to go back and revisit content for inspiration, for lookalike or recommended products that might sit alongside the new campaign launch that you have, and maximizing the usage of this content. That so much are we in a society where it's created once, it's done, I'm never going to go back to it, when you've spent so much time building up these brand assets that have longevity to them. It just comes down to, do you know if they're eligible to be used? Do you own the rights to them? And most importantly, do the team members know that this content is available?
Yeah, the worst thing that you could imagine is having the content that you've spent your budget already producing and forgetting that it's there, having someone else who needs it, not knowing that it's there, and spooling up a whole other creative production to make that happen. So,
and I would say being able to revisit content from an old season or a previous campaign is crucial. However, when you're in the flow of production, it really is about Christmas in July can actually happen when your social team sees that the web team commissioned a shoot that has the inspirational content that they want, right? That flow is the aspect that all teams are aware holistically about content that's in the early stages of being conceptualized, being produced, retouched, and ultimately is available for distribution, because those those pieces of content, ultimately, if you can reduce the volume of overlap in content that's being produced, and I think we as marketers, especially, we should ask ourselves, how many times have we gone and asked for content to be produced that ultimately we find out, well, the content was already available, I wasn't in the loop that it was.
Yeah, big whoops that we shouldn't be making that mistake.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about content readiness. We touched a little bit on tech readiness. Can we circle back to that again?
Absolutely.
I talk about that ecosystem, that not only the tech ecosystem, we've talked about having stakeholders on board, but yes, the tech ecosystem and what is required to be tech ready in this sense.
Yeah, so I think for the creatives and the marketers who are not tech savvy, how you define your technology ecosystem is meeting with your partners about what are the systems that are important to them. Where are their jobs to be done happening? If you're a campaign manager or a project manager, you're probably living within a project management system. If you're someone who's responsible for your website, you're probably living in your brand's CMS that serves up the assets to your website. And if you're a creative, you may be living in Photoshop or InDesign, or you may be living within the DAM itself, where you're accessing the content that can be pulled up. And one of the main questions that you should be asking your representatives at Globaledit or Pixelz is, hey, how do I get the systems that I am responsible for, that my day-to-day lives within, how do I get it connected into my ecosystem? And one of the things or components that made Globaledit and Pixelz so ripe for integration is our applications, our systems are built with an open framework that allows that interconnectivity to exist.
Yeah, it's back again to the whole API aspect of this, and specializing, choosing your specialized tools, and also something that will be cloud-based, I think, is a very important thing. We're remote teams now, and having shared access is critical. It's something. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the pieces that's happened sort of not silently, but has been accelerated pretty drastically in the last 24 months is the shift of on-prem workflows that rely on access to servers and systems that are really only accessible within the firewall or the in-office component that we were once so used to. And now with the rapid growth of cloud technologies like Globaledit and Pixelz, assets really don't ever need to come down to your local server to be worked on. They can live in flow. They can live in the systems that they should reside in, and the rest of it is sort of the magic secret sauce behind the scenes. But what it ultimately means is you're not reliant on content coming down to local servers to be worked on. It's systems are exchanging assets or data, and the status is within, and that relies on technology like Amazon Web Services or the Microsoft services, and even Google, where you're working in the cloud per se, and that the content doesn't need to be doctored or administered by your IT person who has access to open up certain permissions within your server.
So Brian, we're running low on time here, but I want to talk a little bit about finally the benefits to the creatives, which you touched on a little bit, but then also the consumers.
So let's talk a little bit about what one of the best benefits is, which is the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the interesting components is around when you are focusing on the distribution, who does that ultimately impact? That impacts your consumers. And the consumer has access to more and more content. They have access to content that us as creatives and marketers have had the opportunity to spend more time thinking about and conceptualizing and iterating on. And it allows that consumer to access content that was meant for them to be shown.
Increasing quality and increasing volume, and ultimately increasing the way a brand is able to represent themselves to their client, to their customer.
Absolutely. We have a pretty interesting flow chart that we can kind of take a look at here, which is, you have your end touch points, your website, your social, your email, your campaigns, you have outside digital efforts. All of those touch points are where the consumer comes into play. And part of, if we get back to the original context of what it means to go from shot to ready, it is these stakeholders, these team members that are responsible for these distribution points, they actually have access to the content that is a work in progress asset per se, that ultimately, I think in a lot of brands, there's a major wall between these team members that preside on the content that gets distributed out through these channels and a finalized versioned asset that is approved to be distributed. What we're seeing the huge benefit is from Globaledit and Pixelz is the team members that represent the far right are very interconnected with the team members that are on the far left, because ultimately the assets are in the right system at the right time, right? If you're working on content for your website, there are iterations of the versions that you have access to because, well, the labor that it takes to upload and download that content to help handle version management, those barriers are gone. And the consumer ultimately then is accessing richer content that's more consistent across all of the channels that represent your brand.
So Brian, I'm going to let you share our exciting announcement, but we're going to be having another webinar that's going to be a part 2 to this. Can you share what that will be covering and who will be featuring?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, I can't believe 35 minutes has passed us, and we do want to leave time for some Q&A. Today really was meant to just briefly unpack the concept of flow, and hopefully today it leaves you thinking about, is my brand, is my creative team in flow at all times, and what are those key creative phases that make up flow? Because ultimately, if assets stay in flow, you go from shot to ready faster. In our next webinar, I'm excited. We're going to be bringing on a very close client partner that sits between Globaledit and Pixelz, where we're going to do a deep dive into their workflow processes in particular, and really getting to unpack what creative teams in particular were impacted, how did we manage the change management that went alongside that, and ultimately here at the ground level, some of the team benefits that Pixelz and Globaledit have had. So we are going to be publishing this second webinar in the next week, where we will be joined by one of our brand partners that sits between Globaledit and Pixelz, and ultimately for them to deep dive into how this type of integration is helping them solve really critical processes, not just within retouching, but the creative process overall.
That'll be exciting, Brian. I'm looking forward to that part 2. So with that announcement, I'd like to actually get ready to wrap. But before we do, jump into questions from the chat. We did have one question from Yash B that we talked about already, and he has another one for us. Yash, we plan our products and shoots in advance and do most of the brand, and so do most of the brands. If we plan 2 to 3 months in advance and we have a fixed time allotment for shoot to online store, will Flow make any significant changes for the brands that are well planned? So before I throw this to you, Brian, we did kind of talk a little bit about skeptics who say, I've got it all done. I've found all my efficiencies, and what more is there left for me to do? And so I think Yash has a good point that if we plan, it's an efficient process. But what are some of the ways, what changes will Flow and Globaledit and 360 workflow ecosystem do for someone who's already a good planner?
Absolutely. being a good planner is crucial to handling the volume challenges that go alongside with the creative nuances. And one of the components that I would dig into is the planning and knowing what ultimately a 3-month deliverable is to yield is very clear, but what's happening within each one of the creative phases? Where are there time being spent between one task to another? Is there a gap in time that's happening there? And are we measuring the creative team's satisfaction on their responsibilities? And what does the creative team believe that the 3-month planning process is equally as efficient, or are there areas within particular workflows? For this, I would encourage you to think about the post-production process where there's time gaps, right? And is there accessibility challenges that the teams have in terms of staying up to date with a single source of truth, or ultimately having the opportunity to spend the most time thinking about the creative deliverables instead of the tasks management itself?
Great. I have a question for you, actually. We run a very small, lean operation at my ecom studio. We don't use any big dam systems, but I can definitely see a point where that would be valuable, especially with remote people managing certain aspects of production. At what point do you see your clients finding a dam-like service like Globaledit? At what point in the growth of a team does that start to become critical?
I would say plan from the ground up. Most of us don't always have that luxury. We build processes on the fly. As soon as you start to see that your assets are appearing in more than one place, if they're appearing in Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, WeTransfer, and hard drives, well, this is that's breaking flow, right? Because it breaks one of the kind of rules of flow, which is have a single source of truth. So once your workflows start to fall out of that single source of truth, I think it's a real eye opener to say we're ready to think about a dam to help manage all content accessibility and distribution.
Not a size thing, it's a practicality thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some of the smallest startups that we work with in the fashion and cosmetic space is they're not ultimately the largest content producers, but they have very complex processes because the creative output that they produce is so rich. And what that ultimately means is we have silos of teams putting assets in the system of choice, ultimately because, well, the systems aren't talking to one another. The assets that the various marketing teams need aren't in the system that they prefer to work in. And so they kind of take to their wherewithal to build their own technology solutions and ultimately the workflows that go around that. When it's our job here at Pixelz and Globaledit is let's put the assets in the right place. Let's manage the versions of those assets in and out of those systems, but ultimately have a single source of truth to prevent some of the mistakes or the missed opportunity of that content.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really looking forward to our next talk and having a conversation about what the fully scaled ecosystem of Globaledit and Pixelz looks like. I think that's going to be an exciting deep dive. Brian, I don't see any more questions coming through in the chat, and I want to say thank you so much for a great conversation. We have one question. Hey, sorry, Alex, we've got you. Are bottlenecks inherent? So we're going to put that on pause, Brian. We need to help Alex answer this question. Are bottlenecks inherent no matter how efficient the workflow ecosystem is operating? If so, how do you decide where to put the bottleneck? So is that something that we can overcome entirely,
Yeah, so bottlenecks are always going to exist in the creative process. One component that may help keep disciplined around prioritization of that is what are the creative standards, the creative beliefs, or the goals that your organization has. We're actually here at Globaledit going through our quarterly goal setting and annual goal setting process now. And the way that we stay disciplined back to it is, well, do the activities and do those efforts around what we're prioritizing, do they support our company goals? And so each creative group should have their own creative goals and improvements that they want to achieve. And do the bottlenecks that you're looking to address support those goals?
And I suppose if we're eliminating bottlenecks through tech finding and pushing that one bottleneck into the corner so everyone can identify it is actually a mission accomplished in my mind. Yeah.
Yep. For those that kind of sit across the whole creative process, if you have a holistic understanding around what each creative process is, I think you're going to find commonalities and bottlenecks, right? There are between conceptualization and distribution, or distribution and post-production. If there are bottlenecks around work being picked up, well, you have a workflow challenge that is, your workflow is very reliant on people being notified manually about, hey, you're ready to start your next task. And so your prioritization may take themes as well. And so if you can find those themes that you want to address, either people waiting on content or versions that weren't approved to be distributed, you're going to find that when you analyze the entire creative process, there's going to be themes together around how you can potentially prioritize.
Great. And we're going to get one more question from Pedro, and then we'll sign off here. Pedro asks, if we're looking to streamline and move towards shot to ready, do we need to start with pre-production, or can we start with post-production?
Really good question. In the example that we're talking about here with Globaledit and Pixelz, there were a lot of opportunities to focus upstream and downstream. But one of the components that led us to ultimately prioritizing post-production is post-production hinges on so many other teams accessing content. And from a prioritization framework, that really was where, from a brand perspective and ultimately a creative perspective, there was so much opportunity to make that improvement. So ultimately, yeah, you're going to probably, when you start to do this creative process analysis and really put your creative on paper, you're like, I could approve in every single step. Ultimately, it's when you go to the prioritization framework is what has the biggest impact for the creative team and your brand as it relates to how you want to represent yourself.
Exactly. I love that. Brian, thank you so much. You've answered so many great questions. We've covered a lot, and I'm really looking forward to the next time doing this with you again.
Yes, absolutely, Michael. Thank you so much to everyone who joined today. We are recording today's webinar, so we look forward to everyone being able to revisit. If you have questions, please contact Michael or I. Our contact information was available in the beginning. And Michael, thank you to you for being such a great host and asking those such great probing questions.
Thank you, Brian. And everyone, keep a lookout in your inbox. You will be receiving a recording of this. So if there's anything you missed or anything you want to revisit, or if you'd like to share this with your colleagues, please do so. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.